Yes sir, we back. There's some flaming wolves and then some other enemies up here that are very difficult. A special thank you to the one viewer.
Books of Enderal, King Lude and the Maidservant Devotia. This book is written like a play. When the character is first introduced, I will say their name. King Lude. Call all the servants of the castle so that they rush according to my wish to help me out of my miserable condition. Valet. Very miserable, your majesty. Utterly miserable. Let the one who has created this pathless piece of junk be beheaded tomorrow! I want to see his head roll, look at his dead eyes, and abusively grin about his morbid face. This villain will not be allowed to get away just like that. As you wish, your majesty. As you order. He has brought shame upon his craft. I feel nothing but grief and utter rage for the charlatan. He was supposed to forge the king's armor, the glittering royal plate. I have rewarded him with gold for this vicious piece of work. Behold, my valet, the harness will not open anymore. The hinge is jammed. Oh, I can see very well what seems to be oppressing the king. I am not oppressed by the jammed hinge, yet not only it oppresses my mind, it also oppresses the physical nature of my oh-so-comely body. The king's jewels are oppressively jammed by the jammed hinge. Now call the rest of the servants, so that they may unjam the miserable condition once and for all. Maidservant Devotia. Here I am, my great king. Devotia! Great King Lude! Behold, servants, the hinge. My crotch is clamped. The king's glimmering crown jewels are cramped in their physical nature. My lord, quite invidious the situation is. Recently I polished the lance of fair knight Exibris, and my hands are still full of oil and grease. I would surely slip off trying to vent your chamber to unjam the hinge. I cannot unjam it myself. I need a stranger's hand. Such a gruesome day, the bloodline is in danger. Who would be the childless king's heir if the jewels not shine and be worthless after unjamming? What are you talking, valet? You doubt the expedience of the royal gold? I will prove otherwise. Devotia! Yes, my great king. If I look at you, the cramping gets more severe, as if the room in which the crown jewels are stored were shrinking. Oh, the king's generosity and benevolence is growing while he is looking at his despicable maidservant. Listen, valet. Unexpectedly, my great royal generosity becomes. Behold, the hinge. It's opening by itself. The bolts are bursting. The screws are flying. It's blowing apart, and the king's crown jewels are free. Books of Enderal. Tales of the Wanderer, the Blade Master. Blade Master is how many call themselves, even though they barely know how to hold a sword the right way. Most amusing about this is that most of them stop being daring and big mouth as soon as one of them is close to finishing him off. Then they beg and crave for their lives, for mercy, vow on Malphas and the world. The real Blade Master does not beg. If he kneels down, then only to receive the last lethal sword stroke. There exist just a few of these unyielding warriors. The story spins around the fate of such a man who I met on my journeys. A man for whom nothing was more sweet than death itself. You must be kidding, I huffed disgruntled. So much for one loaf? Where are we, in some Curanian noble house of pleasure? That is the price for strangers. No more, no less, persisted the trader. It brings you joy to squeeze people out of their last coin, doesn't it? Let me tell you something. This often falls back on one's own head. I handed the man the demanded sum and grabbed my bread. Have a nice day, my friend, he said with a malicious smile on his face. Burn in the sunfire, I grunted back. The streets of the city were bustling. Around midday this was usually the case. It was the hour of big deals for traders, and bargaining and haggling became competitions. I was only passing through, but I had to replenish my supplies. A week-long walk until the Frostcliff Mountains was ahead of me. If you believe me or not, this trader still offered me the best deal out of all of them. The prices were currently at a horrendous level, especially for travelers. Yes, travelers were the preferred target if they were about leaving someone flat. I sighed and... It is like with a child. You give him a hand, but in the end it has to learn walking by itself. Somehow people were restless, I observed, but even without the use of my special eye and enhanced senses, it was in the air. If I had asked around more, I would have known earlier what was going on. But I just came to know now when a loud screaming resounded. I stretched over the crowd. A young fellow ran up the street. Today is the day. The time has come. The scoundrel is being dragged to the scaffold. Everybody come and see. Time has come. They string him up down at the market. Simultaneously, a loud bell ringing echoed over the roofs of the city. The people turned their heads. Windows and doors opened. Little by little, nearly all the citizens made their way towards the market square. Flustered whispering Books of Enderal everywhere. When the noisy squalor passed me by, I reached out and caught him. His legs swung upwards. I quickly prevented Books of him from Enderal. falling. What's happening here? I asked Bleak. He looked at me scared. My scowl must seem frightening.
The scoundrel. He is going to be hanged, my sir.
Stuttered the lad. Who is a scoundrel supposed to be? I demanded to know.
The bleeding blade. The cutthroat who slaughtered 3 moons ago a dozen members of the order.
I let him go. He threw suspicious looks at me while slowly moving on. I had not heard of a 12-fold murder in the area. I had a good overview of all the men who would be capable of doing such an act of violence. There was obviously something wrong with this case. I made my way towards the market to have a closer look into the affair. A vast crowd of people gathered on the square. The whole city was on its feet. In the middle of the square stuck out a pedestal of 3 gallows, on them freshly bound ropes like a sinister omen. I pushed myself through the mass of people further towards the front. It was not long before the murmuring started around the eastern side of the square. The source of noise shifted further and further until it reached the podium. Then I saw the troop. 5 keepers, armed to the teeth, carried a man within their middle. He had long, scraggly hair that hung before his face. His body seemed maltreated. They probably had kept him in the hole, the most inhuman cell of the dungeon, not even wide enough to turn while laying. For this reason, even his last reserves of strength must have been depleted. Ahead of the troop walked the executioner, wearing a black and red hood. The captive was being held on the pedestal, on which a luxuriously dressed spokesman with the brooch of the order on his chest had taken up position. They knocked the captive hard, so he fell on his knees. The whole time he was looking towards the ground. He didn't make any moves. This man was broken. He had accepted his fate. A stone flew out of the crowd and hit his head. He grunted. bared his teeth without looking up, and shook off the throw as if nothing happened. Blood trickled down under his ear and dripped on the podium. This man, the spokesman pointed his finger on the captive and spit it on the ground. This man, whose name is not worth it to even be mentioned, killed 12. I repeat, 12 of our best warriors, honorable and brave men, in cold blood. The crowd seethed. Shouts of determination echoed the square. In the night of the 37th fundament, he assaulted them during their innocent sleep. Half of them were dead even before waking. A dramatic pause of the spokesman followed. The only acceptable punishment for this is death. The crowd consented, roaring. But, dear people, it would be presumptuous if that would all be it. Before he dies, he has to suffer the same agonies as those he had left behind by the wayside with their throats cut. This scabbiest bastard son of a fisher whore, screamed the speaker. Bring the rack! 2 sturdy keepers rolled the instrument of torture over the ramp on the pedestal. The captive did not show any reaction to what was lying ahead of him. He still has not confessed his murderous acts in the face of Malthus. Until this has not happened, this pathless will also not receive any mercy. Frenetic cries of joy accompanied the words of the speaker. The captive was grabbed and buckled to the rack. The straps were lashed up. The spokesman signaled the executioner with a nod to begin his work. Arms and legs of the captive strained while the executioner turned the crank. Not one sound left his throat. He stayed completely calm. The speaker gave another sign and then...
Yo, thanks for the view.
...continued turning.
Rock on.
The same procedure followed a few more times, but the captive kept a stony silence. Anxious mumbling started amongst the bystanders. The speaker got nervous and hastily whispered something to the executioner. I suspected there was something amiss here. No normal man could endure such an agonizing, cruel torture without showing any hint of pain. Apart from strong drugs or other medicines, there existed only one technique that allowed to completely dismiss any such pain. The iron cloak. Only used by the highest master level of blade masters, the Tyran Galar, a famous ancient federation of which many legends tell stories. Release him, the speaker said with a snarl. We will chop off his fingers, one after the other. The captured blade master was dragged to the decapitation block. He did not fight back. His limbs were flaccid. His spirit was in a different state of mind. One keeper chucked the arm of the captive into the block. The executioner sharpened his mutilation knife, which was as long as his forearm. He put the stone aside, placed himself above the captive, reached back and struck out. But the knife never reached its target. It felt a magic, energetic shockwave that blew across the square, not impossible. The iron cloak had been released. The next moment, the captive rose upwards. The iron shackle rose as if it was made from alien metal. He reached for the wrist of the baffled executioner and broke it with a skillful hold. Then he took the knife and pressed it into the side of the executioner. The marketplace went into an uproar. The people, in blazing fear, pushed away from the pedestal. On the contrary, I pushed towards the pedestal. The 5 keepers of the order drew their weapons. The speaker tried to make himself scarce, but didn't make it far. The blade master pulled the knife out of the executioner's throat, hurled it. It hit the runaway exactly in the back of the head, leaving him slumped to the ground, dead but still twitching for a little while longer. 2 dead men within 2 blinks of the eye. This man was a death machine. You probably can imagine what he did to the keepers, but I will not withhold the details from you. The first to approach him, a dynamic move upwards, a kick in the privates, an uppercut under the jaw, simultaneously the knife from upside down into the unprotected neck. Dead. Now the blade master found himself in possession of his favorite weapon. The second warrior of the order, a severed arm, then stroke through the heart, preceded was all that by various matchless feints. The blade master dodged with a somersault under a blow, while cutting into the knee pit of the third attacker, using his sword to nail the attacker's foot into the pedestal. The blade master gave him a deafening hit into both ears, took away his weapon, used it to kill the third one, drew the blade out of his foot and ran it right into the fourth's throat. Double score for death. The 5th keeper had already made a quick getaway, like everyone who was in their right senses. The torturer in time himself did not harm this blade master at all. I was not surprised by that. These fighters put themselves in artificial sleep, lasting for days. They buried themselves in chambers deep down the middle. The blade master jumped on the pedestal. I was the only one standing there. Between us, there were 3 steps. He stormed in my direction, my muscles tense, but I was too slow. Now it was impossible to dodge. He was fast as lightning flash. My breath paused. In a fraction of a moment, our eyes crossed while he passed me by. I just kept standing there, glued to the spot. My shoulder and shirt was ripped open and revealed a cut so thin I barely noticed it. My heart started beating again. I turned around and saw the Blade Master making his way up the street, followed by a troop of keepers. It took way too long until I started moving again to follow them as well. His combat style was extraordinary, like no other. Under no circumstances did I want to miss the end of this dramatic escape. A swath of destruction lay throughout the street. I saw the trader who sold me the exorbitantly expensive bread. He was lying dead under the debris of his market stall. Apparently he had tried to hastily save all his property. A few innocents wallowed in their own blood, the ones that didn't make it away quick enough. Finally, at the city gate, the keepers headed him off and circumvented him. He suddenly saw himself surrounded by an overwhelming superior number of enemies. I arrived, gasping for air, and leaned myself against one building wall. The keeper created a circle with their halberds facing towards the Blade Master. One man emerged from the troop and stepped inside the circle. My eyes widened. When I woke up this morning from my hard bed between blackberry bushes and thorns, I could never have imagined that I would experience such a spectacular situation like this. The one who stepped forward to the Blade Master was Rageous Starseeker, at this time the very best swordsman of the Order and formerly student of the legendary Lorem Waterblade. He had long, black flowing hair and was an outright handsome fellow, but his sharp cheekbones and flawless complexion were just giving him the impression of a gentle soul. His blade, however, was the most lethal weapon in all of Enderal. Rageous took determined steps towards the Blade Master, stopping at a respectful distance. Silence, like before a storm. There was not the slightest breath of wind. Suddenly the blade whooshed out of Rageous' scabbard forwards. At the same time, the Blade Master snatched his weapon upwards. The sword crossed with a loud clank in the middle, and both opponents halted. "Name?" Rageous asked in a calm voice. "Eramir, Faith of the Chiming Shadows," the Blade Master responded. His voice reminded me of a gnarling old wooden plank floating through a river. "A chiming shadow?" Rageous' brow went upwards. "Well, isn't that interesting? I would like to offer you a fair deal. Surrender, and you stay alive, Eramir. I do not want to kill you. It would be a terrible waste to the whole world. We can discuss everything in peace, without crossing blades. Choose the path of reason." "Do not act so innocent now. You know exactly who I am, and I have already experienced what a fair deal with the Order really means. You did not treat me fairly. You did not offer me any justice. I did not murder these people. They attacked me. I suppose following your commands to do so, Regis. You are human scum, a deceitful snake without honor, determined to exterminate people such as me. You want to get rid of the Chiming Shadows and the Tarangalar. You see them as a threat for your reputation, your cause. You have shrewdly turned it all on me. If you do not let me pass, a fight will break out." Rageous' mouth changed from a relaxed grin to a straight, soulless wrinkle. "Believe me, then you will also die," Eramir said sharply. Rageous took a step back and dropped his cloak. "You asked for it." He loosened his cuff and collar of his jerkin. On top of it, his reinforced leather armor glimmered with golden ornaments. Then he extended his
I think that's the wreck of the morning dew.
With grim expression on his face, Eramir emulated the movement. The two opponents circled each other,
We're looking for
watching
Taro.
the other furtively like feline predators for the slightest sign of chance. Rageous flipped forward, the elegance of an attacking viper. Eramir parried the attempt without any struggle. The blades danced and sparked a silver swirling storm. The permanence and velocity of the fighters was unrivaled. The smallest mistake could decide the outcome of this duel. I followed the clash, mesmerized by the storm of the swords. After fierce acrobatic maneuvers, Rageous found himself one step ahead. With an insidious smile, he dived under Eramir's approaching blade and hit him at the abdominal wall. It was a comparably small cut, but with serious consequences. Eramir tumbled backward and held his hand on the wound. Rageous directly tried to follow up, but his tackle got dashed back. "You are hiding behind your armor, coward!" Eramir snapped. Turned dreadful. He signaled the two keepers to come back and had to take off his weapon. "Now we are equal," he said. His black hair was on his face. He took a delicate silk cloth and wiped the sweat and moved back to his position. Eramir was facing him, swathed only in his off-color rags. The storm restarted, the whirling, the dancing, the search for a weak point in the defense of the opponent. Eramir's movements were followed by a track of blood dripping on the stones. The longer the fight would take, the more this wound would take a toll on him, and I doubted if he had enough strength left to perform the iron cloak another time. In a sudden hurricane, both blades met. They grinded along each other, rasping in the face of their carriers. Abruptly, Rageous grabbed with his free hand Eramir's arm, who could not hinder it anymore. An awful munching resonated. The blade slowly pierced through his body until it came out the backside again. Rageous pushed forward, and Aramir spat. The sword stuck. Rageous smiled, satisfied, while the blood of his enemies stained his jerkin. The chiming shadows are not what they used to be. You quickly gave... He abruptly fell silent. His eyes stared bewildered and unbelieving down on Aramir's sword, stuck in his stomach. The older Blade Master thrust it in with all his power. Rageous rattled, and between his clenched-up teeth flowed out his blood. His face was petrified, lost all its color. A fight is not over before you have assured your opponent is dead. This was a lethal mistake. Waterblade taught you well, but it seems he left out the most important lesson. Aramir coughed with a bittersweet smile on his lips. I warned you that you would die as well. They both spitted blood. The keepers around them watched the spectacle motionless and in silence, numbed in awe. Rageous' face turned to a grimace, filled with infinite hatred. But before he could respond with something, his head sat down. Aramir looked up to the sky. It sounded as if he was finally finished, as if a heavy burden was taken off. Death! Sweet death! Rip my heart out of my chest, he shouted, and the roar echoed from the house of the Now I finally see you, my dear Leona. The whole city, the whole world, somewhere high on top of the tree, a rudder stood. Books of Enderal, Tales of the Wanderer, the Seraph. I'm sitting here, old and gray. My feet once carried me through all times and countries. Yet I've slowly come to realize that my body, my magical senses, grow weak. My journey is coming to an end. I'm sitting here gazing into a flickering fire with which I'm warming my hands in this cold and naked parlor of an inn, the likes of which I visited hundreds of times. Eventually they seem all alike. My quill scrapes across the parchment as a storm is approaching outside. I could sense it coming for a long time now, the dark clouds it brings along in its wake. Everything will change, you'll see. The flow of this world is turning. Perhaps this is also the reason why my time to perish draws near. This legend about an extraordinary fighter was once passed on to me by a wise man. It reminds us that no matter how dark the night may seem, a new dawn is always waiting for us, and it's one of my final tales. A long time ago there lived a man, a keeper of the order, an ambassador of Malthus. For this man, the worst thing to experience was to see sorrow, no matter if it was in humans or animals. This trait arose from his childhood, which he never talked about, with no soul. It's not that this man, which we will call Seraph for now, rallied a whole lot of trusted people around him. In fact, he actually was very lonely and sad. Nearly every being puts a protective layer around its heart over the course of its lifetime, to shield it from inner anguish. The Seraph, however, left his heart open and unprotected. He gave everything he was capable to give to others. In his numerous battles for the Order, he never killed an enemy. As a keeper, trained in fighting one-on-one, this is extraordinary. He concentrated on leading his comrades out of battle, unharmed and in one piece. He strengthened them with spells, put up magic wards through mentalism to interrupt the rain of arrows. If necessary, he protected the injured with his own body. The light of his magic healed their wounds, no matter how terrible they were, and if they were too grave, he cradled them into their death, remaining on their side to the last breath. With his heavy plating, he stood firm as a rock, a ray of light in the midst of battle. Friends and foes alike thanked him for it and bowed before his mercy. In times of peace, he provided the beggars and orphan children of the Undercity with food which he secretly stole from the pantries of the Order. He treated the injuries of the horrors abused by their brutal masters. If they wanted to express their gratitude for his service afterwards, they abstinently withdrew. He would have never accepted a reward. Everything he did to make the world a better place. For he saw what pain can cause, how cities were set ablaze. He saw all the anguish, let it pass into his heart. He wanted that no one else had to feel the same grief as he did. However, his generous deeds were not welcomed by everyone. There were several high-ranking members of the Order who disliked his actions. Their malicious tongues spoke ill of him, said that he does not stand behind their cause if he could not destroy the enemies of Malthus, but instead keeping them alive. They convinced the Grand Master and threatened him to revoke his permissions and his title as Keeper of the Order. He was given a choice. He had to either execute a prisoner of war, or he had to leave the Order. This devious plan finally broke him. The sheer sight of the pleading man to his feet overpowered him with pitifulness. The sword sank out of his fingers and fell rattling to the ground. He then decided to turn his back on the Order. The ineffable misery that filled him after that, he fought the way he used to with light. He gave away all his belongings, even his home, to the poor, until he had nothing left but the clothing on his body. A tremendous sacrifice, though it did not cause him the slightest bit of trouble. Before long, the severe winter came. He had no shelter, no warm clothes to protect him from the cold. One night, it was
hearing the sirens all the time scares me.
Against the exterior wall of a house, could already feel the comfort.
Something that I deal with living downtown that
one of the children he
I think a lot of people know about it.
there.
They're aware of it.
Swiftly it ran off and brought his friends.
I don't
The
know.
word spread like wildfire.
You ever have some bad,
Soon
you
they
get some
gathered
bad
around
memories
him,
associated with
those which he
ambulances,
helped to make
sounds,
their life easier.
these sounds,
The orphan children,
fire,
the
all
elderly,
that stuff.
the
God forbid,
beggars, the
hearing
horrors.
that, it's
They
not always a
surrounded
good
and
thing.
hugged
It's
the
usually
sheriff,
not.
warmed him like a large blanket until the sun
I hear
rose
him a lot
above the roofs
downtown.
of the city.
It's not the worst thing. It's not the worst thing.
Books of Enderal, The Tales of the Wanderer, The Shadow Dancer.
Yeah, just listening to these
The guiding
audiobooks right now.
principle of eternal
From Enderal.
wandering is both a blessing and a curse. No one sees the world the way I do, in its rawest and most primal form, behind the countless veils covering her, with a gaze undimmed by hate or gullibility. My fate as a wanderer had already begun upon leaving my mother's womb. The training that turned me into what I am now required complete suppression of all feelings. It was harsh and exhausting and aimed a total concentration on a single task. I'm sure you're wondering what point there could be in collecting and compiling information on this world's combat styles. If you only knew. No one, not even I myself, can comprehend it. It serves a higher purpose. It's a life's work. From the time just after finishing my education in the Master's Monastery, many adventurous stories arise. This is one of them, one of the first. Something was different that day. Ravens sitting on the gables announced it. The air pressed on my shoulders, heavy as if it were a chain of massive stone. The sun had not yet risen, and in the night there had been frost. Wafts of mist lay over the harbor of Ark. Coming from the sea, they meandered through the alleys as ghostly, snake-like creatures. The bystanders' breath soared to the brim sky as little clouds of steam. They gathered at the spot where it happened. Some were dockers, one a beggar. No one else had appeared yet, though now it would not take much longer for the alley to fill. Poor buggers, that's got to be the 5th murder this month. I'm beginning to take fright now. Just look at the amount of blood in that one skull, smashed like a ripe tomato. There's got to be a madman skirting around, one of the dockers said with a husky voice. This one even had his personal guard with him. Still didn't do him any good. Has to be a damn strong madman killing people like that, another one commented. I pulled down my hood. There was not much time anymore. The guards would appear soon, and it was unlikely that they would be inclined to let anyone through. 3 corpses, parts of one still stuck to the wall his murderers had smashed it against, the twisted remainder lying below. The other 2 were spread along the valley. Bizarre white signs were painted on the walls, probably as some form of deterrent. The people were supposed to believe this to be the work of some obscure secret society. I crouched down before one of the dead. He lay on his back. The time of death was difficult to determine, the cold making any accurate estimate impossible. The man was well fed, his fine garments were sprinkled with blood, and a metallic badge hung around his neck. A rich merchant, a member of the Golden Sickle. I grabbed his head, pulled his mouth corner up, and sniffed. "What do you think you're doing, lad? He's dead. Nothing's gonna change that." I didn't answer. There was an odor coming out of the corpse's mouth. In the third chamber of senses in the monastery, they made me smell it for days so I would always be able to recognize it. It was hardly noticeable anymore, a foul mixture of addled eggs and snoot. His throat was cut through and left only one possible conclusion: stabbed from behind with a very, very sharp blade. The skin was not fringy and cut smooth, smoother than cuts from a razor blade. The merchant's personal guard had died under the influence of enormous bodily power. The manner of their deaths were very different from another, too different. Something here was suspicious. I arose. The laborers were muttering already. "Who is that? What does he want here? Maybe he's involved in the whole affair. You know, sometimes those freaks come back and look at their bloody deed. Wasn't that one here last week nosing around?" I'm getting the guards. One of them bolted away. For me, it was time to go. I had already disappeared in the streets when they returned. In my attic room at the inn, I put my findings down and summarized the insights I had gained. 5 murders. 5 high-ranking merchants of the Golden Sickle. This had ceased to be coincidental a long time ago. There was a reason the last one had guards with him. The possibility of a personal feud couldn't be dismissed. Someone was out to get the merchants. Merchants make lots of enemies during their lives, but that would make it a case for the city guard. What made it my responsibility was this clue: magic. The suspicious odor, a clear indicator for the use of entropy, forbidden magic. In each of the 3 cases, I personally had the chance to investigate since the series began. My old friend, the apothecarius Bellius Gronrand, who was working for the Order, immediately contacted me when the victims appeared on his examination table. Though the whole city watch was on alert, the murderer had been able to continue his sinister doings, utilizing new tricks every time. But I feared he would sooner or later make a mistake and be captured. Before that happened and his head ended up rolling through the streets of Ark, I had to witness him and his incomparably powerful ways to kill. If what I concluded was true, there was only one person he could attack next: the head of the Golden Sickle, Evan Dal Volar. I was Dal Volar's shadow in the following days. If one travels as much as I do, one quickly becomes familiar in the arts of subterfuge and how to observe and follow the unsuspecting. He did not take a single step without his band of heavily armed mercenaries. Even during the night, they surrounded his residence. Should the murderer appear, and he would, considering how reckless he's behaved up until this point, his drive for revenge had to be truly strong. It was a cold and misty night. The hired guards were playing cards and drinking glögg to stay warm. Behind a large, double-sided window upstairs, Evan had finished donning his nightdress and joined his lover, a whore who appeared to favor rich customers. It was all just like any other evening, except for a certain black shadow darting over the roofs. I noticed it, of course. He seemed to scout the area. Murder lay in the sweet smell of crackling wood coming from the merchant's mansion, the sweet smell of death. He danced in the shadows of night, avoiding the moonlight. I myself could hardly follow him, and that was extraordinary. My eyes were exceedingly trained for such things. The mercenaries guarding the main entrance were not but a lukewarm appetizer to him. Their throats were gaping open and their life's blood already running down in streams before they could so much as utter a word. I had to be careful. One false step and I would end up like those pitiful men. With a swift series of movements, the assassin pulled himself up to the first floor. When he disappeared in the dark, I rushed forward, opening the lock with a spell. There was no time for honest thieves' work. Inside, it was deathly quiet. Hopefully, I wasn't too late. While I sneaked ahead, I suddenly sensed a draft. The back door was standing open. But why? I was not even given the chance to end that line of thought. Out of the dark, a huge creature was approaching me. I could make out nothing more than 2 glowing yellow points. Pupils. I threw myself to the side and narrowly escaped it. It was rattling and slurping and trailed a mercenary's corpse on the deal boards. That couldn't have been human. But then what else? A shrill shriek followed by hollow rattling took me out of my shock-induced paralysis. I struggled to my feet and stormed upstairs. The door to the bedchamber was open, with several mercenaries lying before her, all of them gruesomely disfigured. The corridor's end seemed to almost swim in blood. Rushing through the door, I was left breathless. A huge creature, surely larger than 2 grown men, had grabbed Del Villar at his feet. He was hanging headlong and floundered with his feet. Abominable, hideous, deformed with ailing blue to violet skin, red blisters, warts, and tumors from which bones and distorted joints were growing. The creature breathed in his face. It distantly resembled a human. I had seen such a thing only once before. Only the Blue Death could bring forth such a monstrosity. The assassin, hidden under black garments and standing next to a creature, seemed almost thin and malnourished, though he was small even without comparing the two. The merchant's whore was still lying on the bed, now with red streams meandering through the sheets. "Please, I'll give you any gold you ask of me. Please, let me live," Del Villar shrieked, still vainly attempting to free himself. The creature gripped him harder. The merchant howled in pain, and a loud crack was audible. His leg must have broken. "Do you remember my face, my Sir Del Villar?" the assassin asked. He took off his hood, and a young, good-looking blond man appeared. The candle's light betrayed a long scar over his right eye. Evan choked. "No, why would I? Whoever you are, let me go! I beg of you!" he panted. "A shame," the assassin said with a voice cold as ice. "I was still very small when you took everything I had. My father's name was Jorlin Drosselstein. Ever heard of him? You probably forgot him as well, though you once called him friend. Back then you expelled my father from the Golden Sickle and ruined his business. Why, you asked? Because he was a better merchant than you. He might even have taken over your office as head of the Sickle. But then you treat everyone in your way to success like that. Together with your group of corrupt followers, you exterminate them all. But this time you cut off your nose to spite your face. My father took his life after you ruined him, my mother shortly after. You made me an urchin, my dear master."
How we doing? How we doing tonight? Alright, we're about to do Walmart brand Walmart brand Rice Krispie versus Kellogg's Rice Krispie brand Rice Krispie. Rice Krispie. Okay, this is Kellogg's.
Blood splattered on his cheeks. The joy at beholding the merchant's death was written on this.
Yeah, it's good.
He wiped the blade on his cloak.
It's got a chew.
He said to the creature. He gave no. Now we can finally begin the next phase of our quest.
Okay, the Walmart brand right off the bat.
The city guard, supposedly entangled in our
It's more like a brick.
I was still standing in the doorway, silently observing everything. At first, he drew his dagger and was about to attack me. Then, however, he let his weapon sink, and neither did he attempt to flee. I made a step forward. "You resurrected."
It tastes like Walmart.
and nodded towards the creature. "I can sense the dark magic you used. It is right here in this room, and I found traces of it next to your victims."
No, it's
It smells
it's
like
mid,
lifeless
and the
body.
Rice Krispie is actually good.
Go, because you are connected to this creature. The assassin regarded me lurking, calculating. "Judging from the strength of connection between you and this mutated mage, you must have been very close. Good friends? Lovers? Brother and sister," he interrupted with a sullen stare. There was a tense silence. "Who are you? Are you looking to get the bounty?" he asked. "I am but an interested observer. As for the judiciary, I don't have anything to do with them, and neither do I usually involve myself in such affairs." I regarded the creature from a safe distance. "Why should I trust you? Why should I watch you commit a murder if I were your foe? Consider what is known to you. I would be naive to attempt an arrest," I said. It was silent once more. I went to a table, 2 chairs where I sat, and filled 2 cups with the merchant's wine. Though I am not proud of it, I have to admit I didn't feel certain in that moment. I noticed hints of fear inside me and had to kill these emotions immediately. The man before me was unpredictable. "Sit. I should like to speak with you. I don't think we need to worry about time. You killed all the guards without waking so much as a single soul." The assassin looked at me, taken aback. It would seem I had woken his interest in my fearless gesture, since, believe it or not, thus it was that I ended up at a table with a cold-blooded serial killer and his mutated, deadly beast. We had a longer conversation on his way of killing, and other things. "So that's the secret of this Orbaya. You control what she does, Her true spirit is captured inside of her, and she does not realize what happens around her. Neither does she have any control over her body. I have never heard of such an incident during a resurrection or soul absorption. How did it happen? She never coped with our parents' death. In her striving for arcane power and revenge, she overdid it. At first it was fever, then the madness came. I had to kill her before she would kill me. My resurrection spell binds her to the form she assumed during her mutation. But in this state, she can't even speak. I'm searching for power able to help me transform her to her old self, or at least give her the ability to feel again. The assassin spoke so utterly without emotion, he made me feel uneasy just by listening. The creature called Sylvie grunted, as if she were half asleep. With empty eyes, she stared at the wall. You are very young, almost a child still, yet you kill with a determination and audacity probably no one else in your age possesses. I am sorry for your sister, but I do not need to tell you that. You have long disavowed all feelings. I see the iron mantle around your heart. I live only for revenge, and for Sylvie. People like you cannot understand it. You err. I do understand it. Though you and I may not have much in common, one thing still unites us. Without our task, our existence would be meaningless. It would not be worth more than that of a pebblestone on a roadside. Inevitably, our death would be the only logical result. Be careful with whom you compare yourself, Wanderer. In my case, comparisons bring you closer to the darkness than you might like. I can no longer fear the darkness you are talking about. I know it all well. I know it well enough, believe me. Then you never encountered true darkness. Believe me. I did. It sits before me, in human shape, I said. We drank silently. It took some time before the assassin rose to speak again. Jasper, in case you have to use a name in your notes, that makes the story more personal, don't you think? Posterity should not remember me as a nameless murderer. Call me Jasper. Somehow I always liked that name. I laughed and looked out the window. Morning came at last. The assassin drank.
Time.
That will be over soon. This place will be alive with soldiers come dawn. You should leave now before they hang you for my crimes. I nodded. I have a better name for you than Jasper, I said as he crossed the doorstep. Sylvie stomped ahead clumsily and was unrecognizable already. He moved his head aside and I can clearly see the scar on his face. The shadow dancer. He grinned mischievous. But in truth it was the grin of a small boy who lost his whole family. Poetic in a way, but I could get used to it. Then he disappeared, and no living soul ever saw him again. Books of Enderal, Tales of the Wanderer, the Dark Keeper. Magic is a double-edged sword. While the gleaming side of the blade aids men, curing our illnesses, closing our wounds, and easing our daily lives, its darker twin holds far more temptation for weak souls, though they come at a high price. Invariably, the shadowy side of the mighty sword extracts its payment from the lives of those who would entrust themselves to it, twisting and using them to further its goals. Sinestra, the school which teaches that magic, is understandably ostracized on civilized continents. It concerns itself with powers that should not be toyed with, the manipulation of innermost thoughts and of life and death itself. As the saying goes, what's dead should remain dead. During my travels, I encountered Sinestra not just once, and certainly not because I practiced it myself. No, I would not dare to even take a single step in that direction. But every continent has its secret retreats where such magic is practiced, dark gorges lacking solid ground and hope. Since my duty as a wanderer commands me to regularly enter the worlds of eclipse and beyond, I can give an account of a warrior with arcane talents who achieved mastery over the art of fighting with forbidden magic. Our encounter was more by chance than intent. It cracked and thundered. Lightning cast the parlor in its garish, ghostly glare and made candle and chimney fires flicker upwards. Rain pounded against the windows and on the roof. Outside, the wind shook the walls, howling and screaming between every thunderclap. I had before me a steaming bowl of cabbage soup. Its sour stench tickled my nostrils as I took a spoonful, blew and ate it. The soup was awful, but it was also the only fare on offer, apart from a particularly stale hunk of bread. All the same, I have eaten worse. Shabby Inn had seen better days. It was starting to come apart at the seams, one might say. It rained an awful lot in that region, almost every day in the period between winter's bite and summer's burn, and that didn't do the wood any favors. The inn and the village it belonged to were nestled in the dark vale. Couldn't have been more aptly named. In one corner of the inn, the soldiers from the order were busy carousing, singing and bawling and pulling the young serving wenches into their laps. Most of the other patrons were peasants and farmers. "How's it suit you?" the buxom landlady with red cheeks and patterned apron asked. Her husband owned the tavern. She was cleaning the neighboring table where the old swashbuckler snored away the evening. I twisted my mouth in response. "Well, you better be thankful we've still got cabbage. Snails robbed us of all the rest. Out of nowhere they started multiplying and wouldn't stop until we found a way to get rid of them. Did you hire a mage to..."
Snails, bro.
Aye.
What can you do?
One of them...
Barbed wire, landmines.
Or do you simply know more than others?
Let them protect your garden. Ooh, plants. Plants to fight zombies. The ones that like shoot peas and the frozen pea shooter as well.
I can taste this novice's spell.
Yeah, they said it. They said I got autism
The landlady laughed
recently. Makes sense. So like,
anyway, most folks with any decent jokes don't usually end up here. I'm a wanderer.
everybody's got autism these days, bro. I don't
I
even
have
like.
none, and there doesn't need to be one.
Okay,
the
I guess.
mysterious type, aren't we?
Let's go,
Have
W.
it your way. What do you want?
Doesn't change anything.
I sipped in my stale beer.
I don't know.
Outside it thundered again, this time louder. Just passing.
I don't know,
through on my way
fellas,
to the North Wind
but,
Mountains. Well, you
could be
didn't
worse.
choose the best time to make your journey. It's gotten mightily.
Could be worse. I'm enjoying the mountains here.
Camp in the
It's
valley.
beautiful. Makes me want to get out to the Rocky Mountains.
Is this why all the soldiers?
I'd love to go to Colorado one day. They got Yosemite National Park
The
as
whole
well.
lot of them. They should all be hanged. They tore in here last spring, expecting we'd be
Story's
giving up
good.
our land so they can hide out from the authorities. Oh yes, they thought, let's draw some peasants into our schemes. But they were mistaken. I'm not going to be punished as some sneak thief accomplice. It's not been easy for us. That much is true, but before risking death, I'd rather it stay the way it is. I just can't understand how there could be so many Southerners supporting them. They're just causing trouble everywhere they go.
Southerners
The
causing.
landlady chatted to herself and turned my attention outside. Something was happening there.
Hey, yeah.
Clearly no one else had heard it. But
I do have to
heard
fit
it.
though, like.
The heavy iron-shod
Got the
boots.
battle axe, the righteous path right now.
The horses
It's
snorting
crazy.
Someone was coming.
It's
I
epic.
over and I hutched the hilt of my blade hidden under my cloak. The soldiers' cries of laughter were interrupted.
Yeah, it's good. It hits fast. It does a couple points less than the Warhammer, but like.
The silhouette of a tall man was illuminated by the flash of lightning, which revealed his figure in heavy black armor as he stood in the doorframe. The tapered helmet hid his countenance. And
Couldn't
every
imagine the
atom seemed
frigid cold water.
as if one cut his eyes gazing upon his armor. He bore an enormous sword on his hilt,
so
glittering dangerously in the storm.
It would be deadly. Is there any creatures down here? Oh my gosh, man. And there was a mermaid? I'm supposed to watch out for as well. Okay.
For a moment, the inn
I got
held its
this.
breath. Then the high-pitched shriek of a woman terrified out of her wits cut through
Okay.
the silence.
Save.
The half-drunk
Boom.
order
I spotted
soldiers
already.
stumbled
Hi,
quickly
guys.
to their feet as the terrible man
Here to
ducked
fight?
through the doorway.
Yes, you are.
He was followed by two riders bearing the red sigil, less tall and well-armed.
Smashy, smashy.
Go on, rebel. You ain't welcome here. The soldier slurred. The warrior in black armor advanced word. Take your hilt before we cut your legs off. Another man added, seeming less than confident in the face of the giant. You stink of snake, little one, and of piss beer, the rebel said, voice black as tar, murderously low. Get lost, you horse son of a... The soldier choked on the word. With an ugly sound, the rebel's sword cleaved him in two. The men of the order yanked their weapons up, but did not dare to attack the giant. No harm will come to you if you don't interfere, the rebel announced to the patrons, who cowered under the tables. A few seized the opportunity and fled outside. I'm afraid the same can't be said for you, though. He pointed to the soldiers. An icy feeling of terror settled over the inn as the warrior murmured an incantation. I heard the words clearly like an echo. They reverberated, although he made no noise. I rose with my hands tightly clutched around the hilt. Sorcery! Wild maid! Run or steal your soul! One patron panicked as he ran for the door. I had never seen the forbidden arts in the rebels' ranks. Either Kalana has changed her recruitment criteria, or something here was rotten. I suspected the latter. One of the soldiers' eyes turned inward. he suddenly lurched, as if out of his mind, and wheeled around his sword, past friend and foe. Alton, what are you doing? Why are you attacking me? His neighbor cursed. Utter chaos erupted. More mutters from the rebel. The next incantation, the next one collapsing, the next one attacking his combat. Jugs bursting, tables being knocked over, panic shrieks, explosions from who knows where, the soldiers' blood splattering on the planks. The soldiers were killing each other. They did not have a ghost to each other. The warrior laughed madly while observing a massacre. Behold what happens to those sticking to the order. Ah! He shouted, surprised. One of the peasants grabbed a pitchfork and stabbed him right in the face. You wild peasants! Pulled the pitchfork out and threw the peasant against the wall.
EA Sports. EA. We just killed EA, bro.
Then his head slowly
Set of the Ash Warrior?
the bystander
Looks fire, but I don't wear light armor.
looked at the blood flowing out.
Bone bow? Okay.
He walked to the corpses and put out his hand above them. My
And magical
one
symbol.
special vision betrayed it.
Augers. No drowned
Healing
soldier.
his wounds with the powers of the dead.
So sorry,
He
bro.
shuddered. That was
See.
a mistake. I wanted to
That's
spare
pretty
you,
wet.
Will. Real shame.
Set up later. Oh my gosh, there's
Go on
bombs.
ahead. I'll be there in, let's say,
Take your money.
a moment.
You wouldn't have
Saved his
wanted,
companions and sent them
you know,
outside. He sat himself
the worldly
down,
possessions and
tossed
everything.
The contents of another man's cup under his visor. I anticipated what he intended. A wizard with such powers would be able to raise the inn and the surrounding fields to the ground, the people included. I would not allow that. You will never lay a finger on these people.
How do I get out?
I positioned myself behind the warrior, prepared to do what was necessary. Slowly he turned around, eyeing me suspiciously. A muffled laugh clanged.
Can I leave?
Bold, but I doubt you can so much as hold a sword of your
Whatever.
He calmly rose to his feet. Don't waste the last years of your life attacking me as
Yo, what's good? Thanks for jumping in. We're listening to audiobooks about Enderal while playing Enderal. Hope you're doing good.
Counter spells had already been cast, all precautions made. Suddenly the warrior paused mid-stride as if... What are you doing? He asked angrily and tried to move without success. You seem to believe your dark magic will protect you from everything. You were mistaken. Leave me be! He screamed. I advanced, raised my voice until the walls were shaking, grabbed the warrior at his helmet, and with iron will I forced him to his knees. Here, nothing remains for you to be done. You caused enough suffering. I know that you do not belong to the rebels. You pursue your own goals in the name of what you might call justice. But mark my words, whoever you are and whatever evil dwells inside you, with the dark powers you cause harm to innocents and punish them for deeds committed by their masters, not them. Someday your foul magic will eat your heart out. You will go now without protest. And when I learn that you and your men return to attack the villagers, I will find and kill you. Have you understood? He nodded under fearful whimpering. He rose and hurried straight out the door. Short after, a rataplan of hooves reached us from the street. The men rode out of the village at a gallop. I braced myself on a sword. Weakness washed over me like a surging billow. The process had cost much of my strength. Drops of sweat ran over my forehead and my sight became unclear. Colorful lights were sparkling at the fringes of my viewing range. Slowly the villagers approached me. Sir Wanderer, are you hurt? No, I said. I am fine. It's high time to leave this region. I've already been here too long. But you need a rest. Please. You saved us. We owe you our thanks. I broke away and limped to the door, braced on my cane. On the threshold I turned. Burn the corpses. Bodies defiled by forbidden magic seldom stay dead for long. Then leave this place. I stepped outside into the raging storm and pulled my hood over. The landlady, her husband, and the other villagers' voices were swallowed by the pattering rain. In the following years, I heard many tales of that arcane warrior in black armor, whose forbidden arts and cold bloodiness spread terror on the battlefields and in the Order's ranks. It transpired that he led an independent subgroup of rebels, who had broken away from Kilana Hammerschlag. I cannot say where they came from originally, but I doubt he'll ever set foot in that village again. Back then, I probed into the darkest caverns of his consciousness to awake his deepest fears and forever bind them to that village. That certainly did not protect the inhabitants from the other dangers, and neither they nor the other settlements in the Dark Valley were spared from the devastations of the conflict. I will call the combat style of the warrior in his heavy dark plate armor, who knew the arts of Sinestra, the Dark Keeper. Books of Enderal, Tales of the Wanderer, the Well-Traveled One. I cannot claim that I attended many parties in my life. I also never loved like normal people. And concerning women, well, I don't know what it means to share a bed with them. Soft.
Whoops, my bad.
Tenderness are not a
How the heck was I supposed to get out of there? In a reasonable fashion?
which slowly carries me off the
Couldn't tell you.
waves of the salty sea, on mountain,
Dude, that ship's cool as heck.
underneath a sparkling starry sky. That is where I feel at home.
No beds to sleep or
I visited
anything.
many places, saw much evil. These are my priceless memories which will stay with me until death. A lone wanderer, eternally cursed to stride ahead towards a brightly shining sun at the horizon. At this mild evening near the end of summer, none of that mattered. Every so often I wish that the time could
Like, only other thing I could have done was use a teleport scroll.
stay as it is with me, still sitting on
But,
the
I
wooden
mean,
bench in the middle of the
couldn't I always just do that?
square, having the seducing
Alright, well, this place is scary.
The festivities were in full swing.
Frostcliff Tavern. Yeah, I gotta go to
Strong and
Frostcliff
The
Tavern.
party put the whole village in an exceptional state. The tall oaks and poplars shine in the light of red, green, blue, and yellow lampoons, which were hung at ropes between houses and trees. The villagers danced, ate, and drank exuberantly. In fine, it was straight from a book. The reason for the festivities was not just the bountiful harvest, but also the marriage of the village chief's daughter, with a young, sturdy, good-looking boy from the neighboring village to boot. Singing and the sounds of lutes, flutes, and whatever instruments could be found resounded in the alleys. The elderly told the fable stories to the children, and several artists performed the whole day long on a stage, starting with jugglers to animal tamers. I could tell you about the splendid atmosphere the whole day. I enjoyed it to the fullest, even though one could hardly tell as much from looking at it. In the middle of all this hustle and bustle, I cautiously sipped on my mug. Despite my inner joy, I wasn't here by chance. There was something to do for me in this village. I had to meet somebody. As I was watching the villagers dancing, a finger tenderly tapped on my shoulder. I turned around and found myself looking in the face of a young woman. Her hair flew down her shoulders as walnut-brown little curls framed her pink-colored face with cheeks reddened by alcohol. Her glance was light and sweet, but there was something more to it, some sort of immeasurable depth. Still waters run deep, as the popular saying goes. But enough of that. My sir, may I ask you for this dance? You look so gloomy. Such is simply not allowed at such a nice and festive day, she said. I smirked. Am I not a bit too old for you? I was still in my prime, but anyone would have seen that the girl was very young. She could have decided on any other man out there instead of me. Luckily, that is not yours to decide. She held her hand out to me. I shortly struggled with myself, but eventually I yielded to my desire. She led me to the place where the dancing people gathered. I was never a good dancer, that is something you should know. But after a short while, she ensnared me so much that I even whirled her around and performed dance steps which I never even dreamt of. I enjoyed it. It does not happen often that I can forget everything around me, all the torrent and the whispers of the earth. At that day, her beautiful face in front of me, I was allowed to do just that. We sat down on a bench, talked about this and that, about things common people usually talk. I could not resist telling her that she was to my fancy. If my appointment would have allowed me to, I would have promised a few days with her. Perhaps we could have become a cute couple, with children.
We always go too easy on the
noisy
scum.
crickets and coziness. While thinking about that, my heart sinks. But I always knew about the sacrifices I had to make. It slowly got darker, the night fell, and the artists left the stage one by one. The village chief, obviously drunk, teetered under the podium, located at the head of the celebration.
Greetings!
He was down and clapped his hands. Silence spread in the village square. Meanwhile, a joke of mine made the girl laugh so much that she nearly fell off the bench. My name is Lauren. You still haven't told me what this stranger, she said, got so close to me that I could really perceive her scent. She bathed a short while ago, maybe even just today before the party. It smelled unbelievably nice. The moment I wanted to answer her, the village chief, with a loud voice, announced, "Come on, guys! Until now, everything well and good, but now the real show begins. For the highlight of the evening, I have an extraordinary surprise for all of you. Since my daughter and her groom, no price is too high. He came to us from far lands, and after he already astonished the neighboring villages with his skills, he finally arrived at this place. Let us welcome the legendary and crazy fire breather, Dagobah, the famous Flame of Nerim! I picked up my ears. A tense silence filled the air. I owed my name to Lori, although I couldn't have told her a name anyway. I didn't have one. Would have been a nobody in her eyes anyway. A scrawny fellow entered the stage and bowed to the audience. He wore long, baggy trousers which he had to put into boots. Sunburn scars could be seen on his naked upper body. Sideways he was missing some hairs, probably also a victim of scorch. The rest protruded from his head like a gray-white thicket. He bowed, drank a specific liquid, and picked up his torch. I curiously watched what happened next. From the torch, a gust of fire shot in the air. With his other hand, he opened the phial and pivoted it in front of the fire. The flames followed his motion and created a long, swirling, and shimmering snake. He let the snake whir above the stage so that it did several tricks, while he himself acrobatically danced over the wooden planks to finish all the complicated figures. His performance took the breath of the whole audience. The snake had only been the beginning of his show. It was followed by artistic interludes with bow and arrow, and several other homemade constructions, which he combined with his flame arts. In any case, Dagobah lived up to his name. Eventually, the artist was busy entwining 2 fire spirals. I noticed some movement in the rear rows of the spectators. People were roughly brushed aside. 3 guards pushed their way through to the stage. I anticipated that. Now things would get even more interesting. The guards, who were clearly men of Chancellor Baratheon, who recently taken control of Nerim's middle realm, walked on the stage while the village elder wildly protested. One of them took the torch from the fire breather, threw it to the ground, and noisily stamped it out. Laurie moved closer to me while being frightened. "Are you the man named the Flame of Nerim?" one of the soldiers grumbled, who was apparently the commander of the small troop. "Who wants to know that?" Dagobah asked. "Don't get cocky. You are using forbidden arts, magic, right? Don't deny it, we saw enough of your flippery. Chancellor Baratheon doesn't tolerate your kind anymore. We were ordered to take you with us." "And to where do you sirs intend to bring me?" asked Dagobah politely. "To the dark cell in which you belong," was the answer. Dagobah sighed. "All right, let me collect my belongings, then I'll come with you."
Madame.
I frowned. That was too easy. We would never surrender so fast. The fire breather went to the backside of the stage.
Hey,
and finished
wait a
wrapping
moment.
stuff.
You're the
I never
Hermes,
liked
aren't you?
Baratheon one bit, even before he came to power. I always thought that his breath smelled awful, and you could smell it throughout the whole town whenever he held a speech, he said, with his back to the soldiers. Weapons clanked at them. Suddenly, Dagobah turned around and threw a metallic something between the 3 soldiers, something with 8 mechanical legs. "Ah, what's this?" There was a loud noise and the thing exploded. A green smoke screen engulfed the soldiers, and they started coughing and staggering around aimlessly. The village square descended into turmoil. I broke away from the baffled Laurie without any sort of goodbye and shouldered my way through the crowd. Now my merry life was over. I had to leave. I had to leave my dream bubble, which I created for a short time, and went back to my mission. I saw Dagobah only after I had left the crowd. He left the village at a smart pace. I quietly followed him for a while through the dark night and small forests. He stopped in one of those with their roots. 2 big trees overgrew the entrance to an old burial chamber, bathed in moonlight and placed in the fangs of a slope. The iron gate, which should bar the entrance, was bent so much that one could easily get through it. If I kept on following him, there was the danger of scaring him away, so I placed everything on one card. "So, this is where you're hiding." He flinched, just like a timid animal, shortly before he disappeared into the tunnel. I slid down the slope so that I could see him.
Hello.
A good hiding place.
Well
These
then,
soldiers
you've come to the
won't
right
surely look for
music
you.
to my ears.
If nobody
If you need
tells
anything
me,
else,
then
drinks
they'll
and stew,
know.
just let me
This
know.
is madness. All
You'll come back.
He turned around and faced me. "You have nothing to fear from me," I declared. Silence descended upon this place. The cry of a
The
tommy
best
owl
wine
sounded
in all of
spreading
Enderal.
the silence and
Come,
howling of
give it a
sharp
try.
swords. "There are stories about a wanderer in this area. Those about you. From where?" "I can tell by your smell. You do not smell like this part of the world. It's more like a combination of many different smells from all over the world." He interrupted my question. "Seems you have quite the fine nose." He went closer to me and sniffed.
A hard life this
No,
is.
just an exceptionally
hard
trained
life.
one. I interact quite often with animals like squirrels, small fellows. They taught me how to truly use one's nose. I see, I responded while being mildly irritated. It was known that Dragobar was a bit of a lunatic, but it also said that he was not always like that in the past, before the madness caught him. Nevertheless, he was still very intelligent, and his
What is it?
inventories for the stage and his thought over the way of moving showed. His every move was thoughtful. Then perhaps you also know why I'm here. Of course! It's not like I'm stupid. You want to write a story about me, just like your sort tends to do. You're not the first person of craft that I meet.
Oh my,
Not a
now who
common
is
one,
this?
bro.
I've seen this
Collector.
face, so yes, hooray!
Why are you collecting them?
My
The
wares it
warrior
is you
skills,
want
I
to
mean?
see. I
For a
promise
war,
you, they'll bring you
building
glee.
an army in secret, molding according to your beliefs? Or is there a much bigger mystery around all this? He fell silent. I will tell you my story only after you answer my questions. I returned his mad look unyieldingly and resolutely with a glance, steadier than the old stone. I cannot answer them. If you already know my craft, you should know that. Well, then you may leave right now, and I won't tell you anything about me, no matter what you may have heard about me before. He tried to disappear into the darkness of the burial chamber. There are many stories about you. That Dragobar, Flame of Narum, is said to have learnt fire-breathing from dragons themselves. That he himself is a dragon with a human appearance, and I shortly paused to deepen the impact of the following words. That he is said to be the only survivor of the Sunfire. Dragobar's face froze to ice in the moonlight, which broke through the trees, as if a long-forgotten memory slowly creeped back into his mind. I investigated you for a long time before I could finally track you here. That wasn't easy. You managed to hide yourself damned well. Dragobar stayed silent. I know many things about you. Who would I be if I let a genius like you slip through my fingers without mentioning them in my chronicles? You were present when Dalmeric researched the Sunwheel and destroyed Thalgard with his greed. No, I'm saying that you weren't just present, but even his assistant, one of the most famous arcane inventors and strategists of your time. Am I right? The look of the fire-breather had lost its focus, now turned it back on me. Taurus the Arcane One, or Taurus Tasselrock, if you prefer your given name to the one drivel poets impose on you. Perhaps you already forgot your real name. After all, that happened more than 2,000 and several lives ago. There is just one thing you have to tell me, as that's something I've yet to understand fully. How did you manage to survive for so long? Dragobar looked ahead ghastly. Suddenly, he started laughing.
Walk bless.
That's a nice story you created there. You shouldn't take too much of that glimmerdust, Katmai, sir. I'm a simple fire-breather from Narum. I am honored that you saw such a famous character in me. At the same time, I am sorry that I have to disappoint you. He bowed, obviously a sign to tell me how unwelcome I was. Cut it out. Your mask fell off long ago. You know exactly that you cannot trick someone like me, I insisted. His silly kindness was gone quickly. Let's come straight to the point. Does someone else know Rara? He asked in a good voice. I sighed. Are you in earnest? Do you really want to threaten me? That would belly your former splendor. I could hear how he grinded his teeth. He had to fight with himself, which told me that I was on the right track. I would call that one of the most enthralling discoveries of our era. The way I see it, you have two choices.
What are
from
you
yourself.
doing in this part
Kill
of the
me, and by
city?
doing so
Shouldn't
bear
you
your
be,
secret quality from
I
me?
don't know,
Or
somewhere
you try to have a
else?
conversation with me and hear what I have to say. I advise you to choose the latter with regard to the abilities as one myself has to acquire in my line of work, which can make me into the worst nightmare for my enemies, if I have to use it on them, as you should know, I said. The fire-breather remained silent. He most likely weighed his options. Then he took a step towards me. I twitched barely noticeably. He walked past me, towards a rock, and sat down. For a short moment I thought he would attack me. What is it you want to know? Tell me what happened back then. If I could, the last thing I remember is an ear-piercing enormous explosion which took both my hearing and sight. Beforehand, Dalmeric and I tried to decipher the artifact. We failed, which could be common knowledge. After I woke after the explosion, I was in an entirely different place, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Kira's desert. I was lucky that a caravan took me in. Like that, it took its course. He started to tell me about what happened from then on, about his travels over the continents, about his search for a new meaning in life, about how he let Taurus die and took the name Dragobar, and many more. In a way, his current self resembled mine. He wandered all the time, home and nameless. He became a nobody. You changed after the explosion, didn't you? something had changed. He nodded. I lost all my magical abilities. I couldn't even light a small fire anymore. How disgraceful for a former master. At the same time, I gained eternal life. Age cannot kill me anymore.
Please.
As long as
The
nobody
Lord will
pierces me
redeem
with
you for
despair,
your
I can live
kindness.
until then turns to ashes. Immortality. An eternal life. I thought that
Yes?
was only possible for the lost ones in a much more macabre way. Then you're wrong. Though it's not like I can live the dream that most have. The longer I live, the more insane I get.
Hello.
Madness takes over my mind slowly, and I live for the day.
Just
Fighting
where did
it
I
doesn't
put
help
it?
me. I can't prevent it. Why did you work as a fire breather? And why on Naren? Fire breathing was a nice hobby for me, next to all the battles, even in the past. This identity as Dragoball gave me support when I had none. And why Naren? Well, until this Chancellor came to power, it was a nice place to live. I wandered around north to south through settlements on the way. Always had something to eat and a roof over my head. Most of the people here highly esteem true talent. He made a sweeping gesture with his hands. After a long period of silence, I collected myself for the coming and most important part of our conversation. I thought that it was finally time to get to the point. I'm not just here to write about you. Every so often, my mission also involves the task to help souls, which do not belong to this world anymore, find their path. The magical power of the artifact had a different effect on you than your companions and your own master. It spared you for whatever reason and brought you to another place. Perhaps the reason was that you still had the mission to accomplish in your life. It granted you supernatural powers and left much of you in here now. But this magical trace was the reason why I found you. You do not belong here anymore, Taurus. I can see into your innermost self. Your time is long up. The mission which bound you to life is already accomplished. He dropped his gaze. You want to kill me? No. Killing contradicts my creed. I can do something else for you, but it will only work if you make peace with yourself and you're ready to go. After such a long time, it is always hard to say goodbye. Tell me, what is it? I reached into my bag and pulled out a flat stone, roughly as big as a fingertip. It shimmered weakly in the light of the night and mirrored the colors of a rainbow. This is a shifter. I put it down on your tree stump. Swallow it, and you will be able to leave this world without any pain. Don't you force me to swallow it, Taurus said in wonder. Judging over life and death is not my task. I want to help you. If there is ever a time in which ordeal of being immortal becomes too much for you to handle, take it. It will set you free. I pulled my cape closer and turned around. The foliage of the last autumn which covered the floor rustled under my boots. Thank you.
What?
I nodded while looking in the opposite direction and left the little forest. Whether he still lives or made use of my help, I cannot say. Dragobar, Taurus, the Arcane One, the Flame of Naren. That man had many names, many of which we do not even know. I want to add one to those. Taurus Tasselrock, the well-traveled one. Books of Enderal, Tales of the Wanderer, the Archer from the Steppe. On my travels through Vin, I had a lot of interesting encounters. Some of them with more, some of them with less of a pleasant ending. I met beings who could change their face like a woman does her clothing. Walking corpses, lost ones, ghosts, monsters that try to tear me apart with their tusks and claws. The world's finest warriors and mages, even if they boasted their titles and deeds later revealed as lies. The madness and greed of two monstrosities which, at first sight, might not appear to fit this tale, but show what can become of humans in terrible distress. Well, I could certainly tell a thing or two about it and entertain a lively crowd for several evenings, but I'm neither a minstrel nor a vagabond, whoring and drinking from tavern to tavern. The Wanderer, that is my name. The purpose of my never-ending journey is to find the fable warriors of Vin and reveal their legendary fighting methods. Now read what I have to tell you. One day I found myself working my way through the steppes and rocky caves of the sandy mountains of Eraziel. It's said that there in the barren wasteland once lived the most dreaded marksman beyond the Spice Canal. I had already heard stories about this warrior. Old Man is what the pockmarked drunk called me, who told me about him in a shabby pub located in the harbor of a great city of Al Rashim on the coast of Kira. He reeked of seaweed, fish, and salt water, was clearly a sailor who had seen much of the world. "Take off your hood, I want to see who I'm talking to." "Oh, what a fine scar you got there. You got it from a fight, eh?" Guess you ducked down a little late there, Gramps. Your right eye doesn't look too healthy either. Those colors are not normal. You might want to get that checked out. But let's get back to the matter at hand. Did you hear the latest rumor from Araziel? He announced with a thick Enderalian accent. I looked sharply at the poor devil and shook my head, even though I knew very well about the one who had reduced the number of bandits in the Sandy Mountains in a short amount of time to just a handful. They called him the Avenger of the Desert Dust. By the gods, some fiend he is, inhuman and tremendously mighty. They say that he kills without his victims even noticing. Not until it's too late, anyway. One moment you're alive, the next you're dead. You really shouldn't get in the way of someone like that. Then he leaned forward and hushed his voice. They say he can bend time itself to his will. After continuing my research, I set out to see that man with my own eyes. I traveled through the barren mountains, asking around the settlements of nomads, but no one knew the identity of the mysterious marksman or where I could meet him. It was several weeks before I could come across a promising opportunity. At midday, under the sun's burning gaze high above, I climbed a tall ridge and suddenly heard the sounds of a battle. This is what I was searching for. I followed the noise and hid behind some rocks for cover. It could hardly be called a battle anymore. It was such a short encounter, I could scarcely believe it had even occurred. It was 5 against 1. A peddler, slim and tall of stature, probably a Razalian, was threatened by a group of bandits. They knocked over his cart and killed the steppe beast pulling it. A dark red puddle pooled from under the massive carcass. The man was pleading for his life as the bandits tormented and harassed him. It was the perfect bait for the Avenger of the Powder Desert. He didn't even make them wait for long. Suddenly, a particular feeling came over me. I immediately recognized it as the feeling of magic at work. Over the years, I had developed a sixth sense for it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a hooded figure carefully creeping towards the bandits, with movements as dexterous as a cat's. The next movement, the figure raised a hand and lightning and fire rained down on the clueless bandits. The figure then sprang up, revealing a bow, and knocked an arrow. And that's when it happened. Silence at first, then a strange whirring. The environment changed before my eyes as everything suddenly engulfed in a drab gray sludge.
What is it?
Each blink of an eye passed like an eternity.
Show me.
Everything was trapped in a spell
The name
cast
of
by
the
the
sun.
stranger. I knew what he had done.
Zalayu.
I felt
That's
how he
her.
dragged another reality out of the ocean of possibilities
Vouched
into
for
life,
by
and how it
Dalmarsa?
became new reality.
Who's that?
Resting in between all that were fractions of tiny splinters of time itself. For the
Right.
stranger, the river
Dal
of
is a
time
title
was
in these
unchanged,
parts, isn't
and he
it?
moved about as if
Well, that
standing in the
explains
center
why the
of a
Morning Dew's
roaring
captain
cyclone.
took a penniless Eterna with
I
her in the first
swiftly eluded
place.
myself from his
She had a
power with
nobleman
the
who
help of a
guaranteed her
warding spell.
payment.
My second
Damn it, this is a
special eye
lead.
caught the arrows
All we need to
which
do is
whirled
find
through
this
the
Dal
air,
Mercer person
each
and we'll
followed
find
quickly
Tara.
by a spectral arrow. As the spell subsided, the bandits were lying at the feet of the peddler, dead, pierced several times by multiple pointed projectiles. I couldn't believe my eyes. The stranger
Indeed.
walked towards the peddler,
And hang on.
made sure he was unharmed,
the
and
first
shoved
part
a
of your
purse of
payment,
coin into his
as
hand to
promised.
compensate for the broken cart.
I'll
and
talk to
pack
the
animal.
innkeeper
He did
and
it
see
in
if he'll let
utter
me leave my
silence.
caravan and
Then the
Elrond
stranger
sheltered
disappeared
somewhere
in
near
a
the
cloud of
tavern.
dust. But
Just
not
meet
before
me in,
casting a glance at my
say,
hiding spot.
one day
He
in
knew
Ark?
I was there.
All right?
I rose.
Do you
The
know a good
marksman
meeting
was,
point?
I realized, slight of stature. He had piercing green eyes, the color of poison, with long lashes and a red strand of hair coiling from under the scarf, covering head and most of his face. Not a marksman, I realized, but a markswoman. After she left, I accompanied the peddler to the next settlement. I never met the warrior again, but what I saw was sufficient to convince me of her talents. Based on the combination of conventional mental and elemental magic she used to preemptively strike down the bandits, coupled with her ability with the bow and uncanny stealth, I decided to name her fighting technique the Arcane Archer. If you also put her most powerful talent of slowing down time into consideration, it adds up to a pattern that turns this warrior into one of the deadliest ranged fighters in the world. The only question I still ask myself is where she gets the riches from which to compensate the traitor, as she lived in a poor region and the nomads surely had not enough to pay her for her deeds. They used to circulate rumors around Araziel that a magically gifted noble's daughter, well known by the people as a cheeky brat of brisk and rebellious temper, ran for no apparent reason away from home at one of the civilized coast cities. They say she took part of the family treasure from Voltiz, probably as some kind of revenge on her overly strict father. Physical features of this noble family were green eyes and red hair. Myths and Legends, Volume 1. The Blind Miner. The Blind Miner is supposedly one of the most well-known Endralian lore. The reason for that is likely the fact that it occurs right beneath the feet of Ark citizens, down in the mine shafts of the Tar Pit, the country's second biggest mine system. The Blind Miner, whose actual name is unknown, is, according to the legends, a lost one that lurks in the tunnels of the Tar Pit. Countless lives of careless workers and undercity dwellers are said to be taken by him. His eyes are hidden behind bloody rags, his body covered in sickly skin and boils. His grotesque face consists of inhuman teeth, sharp and spiky, like those of a wolf. The reason for his existence is, according to the legends, a disaster which took place in 6342, deep down in the mines. A rockfall buried a tunnel together with 15 miners, trapping and separating them from the outside world. The amount of rubble was too high. Even after 3 weeks, the entrance was still closed off. After another 3 weeks passed, the miners were believed to be deceased. The entrance was reburied and the path barricaded. A cruel fallacy, for the miners were still alive. The first few weeks, they lived off little amount of provisions they were carrying with them. Once it ran short, they started catching pus beetles and rats to consume them. The sheer will to survive and the sound of pickaxes on the rocks that were isolating from the outside world gave them hope. As the sound went silent, however, they started to panic. They were trapped for all eternity and they knew it. Little by little, they lost their mind. Everyone except the one we know to this day as the Blind Miner. He, a former foreman that was praised with popularity among his comrades, reminded everyone to be calm. And
What the? Do you think I'm an idiot? I saw that.
Spent his time searching valiantly for a way out. The more days passed, however, the more dreadful their situation became. The Blind Miner was no longer able to soothe his comrades' panic, and steadily worsening hunger did the rest. One day a glimmer of hope appeared. The Blind Miner discovered an exit. With joy, he wanted to return to his comrades, but on his hurry back he encountered a cruel sight. The corpse of one of his men. He was terribly mutilated. His belly was ripped open by some sort of axe. Blood and intestines were scattered around the dusty ground. Even before he followed the voices coming from around a corner, he knew what had happened. Raging anger consumed the man. They were this close to rescue, this close. And they still decided to engage in this inhuman act, instead of believing in Malthus's light. Without a second thought, the Blind Miner freed the axe from the corpse and rushed to his comrades, which stared at him with blood-stained mouths and frightened eyes. Before they knew what happened to them, he killed them all. But instead of leaving the mine shaft, he stayed with them, because he realized what he did. Filled with disgust, he ripped out his own eyes to no longer have to bear the sight of his deed. Author's note. To this day, it is unclear if the Blind Miner actually exists, but arcane investigations point toward it. Apparently, he has magic protection at his disposal, which makes it impossible to physically harm him. According to legends, a sonic totem may break the spell, but it is unclear how one could be created, especially since the practice of psionics is forbidden. Solely the apothecary can have access to this knowledge, but even if they do, they would probably have locked it away. Myths and Legends, Volume 2, Arveltine the Wanderer. The following part could be secured from the rock.
It's just not
Deep
my
down,
day.
in a dark valley, a man with deep sorrow steps up and down, evermore. Salvation is his objective. For long he craves the last voyage, the eternal paths to come, but refused it is to him. He wishes for exemption. His inner monster rages and howls when he digs his grave, since long ago it has taken him in possession and inhibits his dead. Now he lurks for valiant fighters who bring an end to his agony. But every weapon failed on the black pelt of the grim. The white in his eyes, dazzling, seems frightened of flame. So is the monster's only weakness, the blazing flame of flesh. His earlier life long forgotten, his deeds, his name. The atonement through Malthus was righteous, as he. Remark of the author. The ink of the last lines dissolved due to moisture, and the paper went rough and fragile. Who or what exactly it is concerning is therefore not further known, but seems his human cast was accompanied by something bestial. However, stories about the criminal Arveltine show remarkable similarities. Centuries-old legends report that the infamous murderer named Arveltine without scruple, who is assumed to have conducted countless murders in the Dark Valley, not even high-ranked members of the Order were accepted. Once Arveltine was lurking on a trader caravan in the Dark Valley, the murderer's gang created a bloodbath, spared nobody. Even children were among the dead. Malthus himself spoke a punishing verdict upon Arveltine that his character would stick on him for all time. He combined the murderer without scruple with the grotesque, wolf-like monstrosity with which he had to fight from then on in his mind, and which occasionally broke outward. Since, like a wolf, Arveltine was characterized by a wild and animal-like mentality, which he had to fight as a burden with his last humanity.
It's just not my day.
Myths and Legends, Volume 3, The Ash Widow, composed by Archmagister Gawain Girathu 8112. One of the perhaps most eerie and gruesome legends of Enderal is the one surrounding the Ash Widow. The Ash Widow was a charming young woman who had been promised to one of the Sublimes as his companion. Her hair was long and colored in a reddish blonde in the likeness of late autumn leaves, and her eyes were tinted in the deep blue of the sea.
I
She
saw
was
that.
wise and well-read, played the lute, and enjoyed large popularity at her family's estate, in no small part due to her cheerful and buoyant character. Her future companion, the son of a rich count, was also of high repute, and when the two swore each other companionship, the bards were singing many a song of praise in the two lovers' dignity. But not long thereafter, the newlywed wife noticed discrepancies in her husband's character. Though at feasts, with other sublimes present, he always spoke gently of those treading the lower paths. His wife heard him tell different stories entirely after a few cups of wine. He held no sympathy for craftsmen, artisans, and worse still, those dwelling in the Undercity. "There is a reason as to why Malthus blessed us with our path," he said. "Our blood is worth more." If initially it were such words that made the young woman feel anxious, words quickly turned into deeds. He had the legs of a stable boy who had saddled his horse incorrectly broken, and knocked out a servant girl's teeth after she had spilled wine on his coat. When the young woman confronted her husband about this, he merely regarded her dismissively and walked away. As the years passed, the woman's sorrow grew with each new winter. Often she thought about running away, however, as her husband's crimes were not directed at her, and he could even show noble behavior at times. She did not dare to put these thoughts into practice. After all, where could she have fled? One day, however, things would take a turn for the worse. A young, half-Eternian maidservant had begun her service at the castle. She was hardly 16 winters old and shy in nature. But the woman noticed her companion's glances and stares, filled with a mixture of malevolence and lust that sent shivers down her spine. Soon thereafter, the woman realized how the young maidservant was always avoiding her glance, the head bowed as if she were terribly ashamed in her presence. Her companion, too, came to their bed increasingly absent and unenthusiastic. Day and night she pictured to herself what her husband might do with the girl, until she decided to hide in the wardrobe on the day the half-Eterna was supposed to clean the chamber, before she told her companion that she would seek out the peddlers visiting the region near the castle, as they did every full moon. As soon as the servant had shut the door with shaking hands, the latch rushed down. From within the wardrobe, the woman saw her companion standing in the doorframe, panting with excitement. The half-Eternian girl stood still, frightened and without any sign of resistance as the man grabbed her. It seemed as if she accepted her fate long ago. After being rudely pushed to the wall, where she hit her head, something unexpected happened. A wave of magic energy took hold of the man. Traumatizing event must have awoken the girl's magical talents. Magical bands entangled the man's right hand and covered it in darkness. Angry and surprised, he grabbed her throat, and the shocked girl was no longer able to keep the spell unknown to her. When the dark veil dissolved suddenly, only a knock-on claw remained where the previous hand had been. Irritated by his body's wild magical deformation, the man waited a few seconds, thinking. Though his healthy left hand remained at the servant's throat, he concluded that he would be unable to continue walking the path of the Sublimes when soon all the world would know he'd laid his hands on a witch. His previous life would be at an abrupt end. So he took hold of the glowing oil lamp, but before he was able to throw it at the still petrified servant, his wife stormed out of the wardrobe to stop him. But it was too late. The blazing oil poured on the floor, and in moments the woman and young girl's clothes began to burn. In the moment of their deaths, the servant's wild magical powers merged with the deceived woman's desire for revenge to form a powerful and horrible spirit being, the Ashen Widow. After the fire was quenched, the man chopped off his deformed, claw-like hand with the woodcutter's axe. To his family and the ones present at court, he insisted that the half-Eternian servant had attacked his wife with wild magic out of envy, burning down a part of the room. He had tried to rescue his wife when his hand was burned in the magical fire, forcing him to leave his wife and remove the remains of his charred hand. Count's son was able to preserve his good name, continued on the sublime path, and finally succeeded his father. But up to the end of his life, was unable to find a new companion, and each night he encountered the Ashen Widow, who robbed him of his sleep and poisoned his dreams. His life as Count and Lord of the Castle was a miserable one, and when his last hour approached, he realized that it would be long forbidden for him to enter the eternal paths, and with remorse, he anticipated his next life, which, in accordance with Malthus's will, he would have to spend in the Undercity. Author's note. The myths claim that the Ashen Widow's ghost still walks among the castle's ruins, and those foolish enough to bring her husband's claw to the old castle will be able to raise her from the dead. We can only speculate that on the claw's current location, but it is said that it still reaches high prices among antique dealers. Again and again, one of them sells the horrid remains for good money after acquiring it for little from disheartened and ashamed adventurers who did not turn out to be daring enough to conjure up the Ash Widow's spirit. Myths and Legends, Volume 4, The Mountain and the Desert. In younger times, the mothers from Duneville told their children of the mountain and the desert.
Sure.
This
Where
they
to?
hoped would purge their children of their youthful boldness, so challenging to those who seek to stay true to the path, especially in the early years. The words set down here concern a wild mage who retreated to the Powder Desert, the better to surrender himself fully to entropy, and to pull otherworldly beings from different realities into our own. It began with hair and scales, then full limbs, and in the end, entire beasts. He bore no interest in humans, and cared nothing for spectral beings or the lost ones. Following a few rainy seasons, which the reader may consider akin to winters in our heartland, he had grown so skillful in the use of forbidden magic that the summoning of animals from the desert lost its appeal. Those alternate realities he found were too similar to our own mundane plane. Though he witnessed great cats unlike anything found in our world, and gazed upon richly colored gangly birds, or observed jet-black bone rippers, in time, the wild mage came to regard the exotic beasts with studied eye. He designed special cages for the creatures he summoned, and took to observing them closely. The mage watched closely his specimens, sketching what he saw, and satisfied with his drawings, returned the beasts to their own time and place. Research, you see, was his singular passion. This wild mage, whose name remains forever lost to time, found himself adrift in the sea of endless realities, unable to orient himself, and so sought after a plane where time itself ran separate from our own. Quite to his surprise, the mage succeeded one day in anchoring his mind to a far-off world, thrilled as he was by what he saw through the veil of distorted haze in that exotic plane. He soon managed to pull the first being he discovered into our reality. The beast proved a towering lizard, vast as a battering ram, with menacing horns and a gigantic armored plate on the back of its skull. In his haste, the wild mage failed to register the sheer size of the lizard and soon paid the price for his hubris. When the portal from the distant world appeared and spat the gargantuan beast into its meager cage, the bars burst wide with a mighty crack like thunder. Perhaps feeling torn from its natural place in time, or perhaps terrified of the rending sound of the cage, the great monster raged at the wild mage and drove one of its murderous horns through his eye. Thus ends the story and the life of the wild mage. It is said that even today, vagabonds might paw through the twisted remnants of the rusted cage and find 3 traces of a skeleton withered away by time and desert winds. Of the monstrous lizard from out of time, however, nothing remains, save the whispers which still breathe life into the ancient legend. They call it the mountain in the desert. Myths and Legends, Volume 5, The Steel Warden. A lesser-known myth is one of the Steel Warden. Its lack of popularity is all the more astonishing considering it is one of the oldest mythological creatures of Enderal. According to legends, the Steel
Can I help
Warden
you?
was once called Enderal Rathu, a half-Eternal who served in the ranks of Arcanist Dalmeric's most trusted, who, as we know, bears the blame for the devastation of the Thalgard
Greetings.
region. It is said
Sure.
that Ibrail, a most path-abiding man, saw the disaster coming. More than once he advised caution, which his master ignored. One day, scarcely 2 moons later, the catastrophe, which we know today as Sunfire, was bound to happen. He decided to act. Dalmeric has strayed from his righteous path, and Ibrail knew it was his holy duty to stop him. This pained him to an unbearable extent, as he
May
served
his light
Dalmeric
guide
for
you.
4 decades. Nevertheless, he snuck out into his master's
Oh,
chambers
hello.
at night. Yet
I haven't
as he
seen
was
you around
hovering
here
over his
before.
bed, the axe
Oh, a bit of
raised
this
above his
and
head.
that.
He suddenly
Feel
froze
free to take a
midway
look.
through. The eyes dilated by terror. He had to watch his skin turn gray and his back sprout prickly outgrowth. With his last vim, he uncovered the sheets under which a human form loomed. It was a scarecrow. Ever since it has been Ibrail's destiny to wander the catacombs of the now ruined monastery, in which Dalmeric had carried out his research. His will is bound to his old master by a manner of magic, and even though he is already deceased, the curse still lasts. Marauders, Sunborn, and Lost have already tried to finish the rigid figure, but Dalmeric's magic was too powerful. Neither fire, nor ice, or poison can harm him, and even the mightiest of blades just barely cut through his armor. Books of Enderal, Euro's Diary, First Letter. My name is Euro Sunwind, and this is my first life letter. Last night, Sierra and I had a lengthy talk about our plans for the future. At one point, Sierra noticed that a lot of visionaries tend to become cynical, the reason being they lose sight of their goals. These documentations shall record my aspirations. In moments of weakness, I want to read these to remind myself of what is dear to me. Well, this is the first one.
Blessed.
Just yesterday, the Keeper of the Order from Ark visited the village. And if that weren't enough, he also detected some magic inside of me. Me, an Arcanist? It's difficult to express my feelings with words. I feel like all my hard work is finally paying off. Interestingly, this arouses a particular, somewhat morbid thought. Maybe it is, in some sad way, even good that my mother passed away. Why? Because it opened my eyes. Now I don't feel anything other than a lack of understanding, and yes, even anger, towards the simpletons of the village, both the children and the adults. Day after day, it's always the same. They get up, work, and let themselves be amused by the bards in the evening. Can't they see what's happening in the world? Everything they pass on, should it really be just a brief inscription on a stone? Syrah is different. She understands me. She shares my dream. And if Master Igres accepts her as an apprentice, we could continue to be close in the novitiate as we are right now. Second letter. 15 years have passed, and a lot of my wishes have come true. Syrah and I are now living together, but with the craftsmen instead of in the temple quarters. It has been 5 years since I completed the holy trial. Despite what I originally planned, I've decided against the military path and will be a school teacher instead. Why? Because I believe that I can reach a lot more people by sharing my vision with the young, rather than fighting in wars. Such things might sometimes be necessary, but they stand for everything that I stand against. Beyond that, the Truchessa has recently adopted the food bank bill, which Syrah and I developed together. Twice a year, rich Endralians are obliged to contribute a handful of pennies into a chest, which the poorest in the Undercity are brought with a warm meal. The reactions were mixed. Some agreed most enthusiastically, while others were outraged. Often I would hear things like, "It's their own fault they live in misfortune," or, "If they would actually work, they wouldn't starve." Such people make me furious. What cursed ignorance is this? Of course it's easy for them to see the sky atop their ivory towers, but they'll never understand the plight of the poor. Despite how angry this letter may seem, I'm quite content overall. I'm starting to feel as if I have a purpose, that I'm moving in the right direction. And my happiness is due in no small part to the woman who always stayed by my side throughout all these years. It's strange. I know you'll probably never read these pages, just as I might never see one of your letters, but still, I have the feeling as I'm writing these words that I'm talking to you through the ink. With that in mind, I love you, Syrah. third letter. Syrah is dead. Killed by a group of scoundrels as she was delivering the food for the food bank in the Undercity. How quickly these words have been written down, but how can I express this anguish, this emptiness even remotely? It sounds so absurd. I'm talking to a piece of paper because no one else wants to listen to me, nor could they even remotely understand what this means to me. Syrah always told me that these letters would give me strength, but they don't. These lines appear unfamiliar to me. Everything feels wrong. I feel wrong as I get up in the morning. I feel wrong when the sun hides behind the cloudy sky at noon, and I feel wrong as I lie alone in this big bed in the evening. Malthus judges suicide to be a sin, since every one of us has a purpose in life to fulfill. But could this really be my purpose? I might have 30 winters left at most, depending on whether or not an illness snatches me away. And behind me I can see nothing but failed dreams. Our damned food bank bill has led to downright wars at the banquets of the Undercity, the rich trying to weasel their way out of making payments as much as they can. And in front of me I see nothing but fog. It seems most fitting. So tell me, Malthus, is this really my path? Is this my purpose? To be a failure whose fate it is to die alone? My thoughts are chaotic and I'm tired. I don't want to keep writing. Books of Enderal, Euro's memorial book. My beloved Syrah, this is my final letter to you, and I'm writing to ask you for your forgiveness. Forgiveness for murdering you, because that's what I've done. I can very well imagine how you would react to this if you were still alive. You'd smile, shake your head, and tell me this is one of my moments, when I tend to blow everything out of proportion. But as much as I'd like to believe that, you'd be mistaken. No, it wasn't me who ended your life, but I still bear the responsibility, for it was I who let it come this far. Why? Because I was the one who deceived you. I was the one who told you those ridiculous tales of heroes and idealists.
Hey, yo, what's good? Thanks for tuning in.
I told you that only cowards give up, and it was I who infected you with all these ideas of mine, which were no more than foolish illusions. I see it now, clearer than ever, but I didn't back then, because I made a mistake. The mistake of thinking that this world wants to be saved. Sounds trite, doesn't it?